Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going behind the scenes, like behind those ivy-covered walls you always see in the movies, to explore the inner workings of academia. And to guide our journey, we'll be using the Academic's Handbook. It's the fourth edition, revised and expanded. This book's kind of like our insider's guide to what really makes higher education tick today.
Yeah, and it's not just, one person's view. It pulls together the voices of a lot of people who live and breathe academia. Like you've got professors from tons of different fields, and they're at all these different stages of their careers too. Plus, they come from so many different backgrounds, which really helps you get a feel for what's going on in academia right now, not some outdated image.
Right. No dusty old stereotypes here. And for you, our listener, think of this deep dive as your crash course in higher ed, whether you're prepping for like a meeting or just curious about how things work in universities.
Exactly. Like, we want to extract the juiciest bits from this massive handbook and make sure it's all really clear and easy to digest.
So you get the key insights without getting bogged down. Okay, let's jump right in. And the best place to start, I think, is with the students themselves. Because the Academic's Handbook, it really highlights some major shifts in who's actually showing up on campus these days.
Mhm.
What are some of those big changes that stand out to you?
Well, I think the sheer scale of how the student population has changed since, like, the year 2000 is pretty remarkable. Like,
Yeah.
we've got way more students from low-income families now, as well as more who identify as female, Asian Pacific Islander, Native American, Alaskan, Native, Black, and Latinx. And just to give you an idea, the number of Latinx students has more than doubled.
Wow. And it's not just those kind of traditional categories we always hear about, right? The Academic's Handbook makes it clear that today's students are diverse in all these other ways, too. It's like you've got differences in physical abilities, how people learn best, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, political beliefs, where they come from in terms of immigration and citizenship, even their previous education. So it's a much bigger picture now.
Oh, yeah, way more complex, right? More multifaceted than we've typically given it credit for. And there's also a noticeable increase in the number of students who are 25 or older. By 2015, that was like over 40% of all college students. And you know what? These students, they often have completely different life experiences and responsibilities compared to that stereotypical image of, the 18-year-old fresh out of high school.
Right, which leads to this really powerful quote in the book from Sarah Goldrick-Rab and Jesse Stommel. They say, today's college students are the most overburdened and undersupported in American history. It's like, that really makes you stop and think, right?
Oh, sure.
So beyond just the numbers, the core insight here is that old one-size-fits-all approach to higher education, that just doesn't cut it anymore. Like, if you're an educator or you work at a university, you have to understand the incredible diversity and the pressure these students are facing. That's key.
Yeah, you really do. And they have the data to back it up, too. Like,
Mhm.
more than 1 in 4 students, they have a child. Almost 3 out of 4 have jobs. And over half receive Pell Grants, which is supposed to help low-income students. But it doesn't even cover all the costs. So they're still struggling financially.
They're juggling so much. And it's not even just the financial stuff, right? The Academic's Handbook also touches on the additional difficulties for students who, say, transfer from another college or international students. They're navigating a whole new system. Plus, there are students who need accommodations for learning differences, some who've experienced trauma, and even those living with a fear of deportation. It's a lot to deal with.
It is. It's a lot.
So with this image of students who are like carrying so much weight and so diverse, it's not surprising that the academic labor force, the people teaching and supporting these students, they're seeing their own world transform too.
Right, right.
Okay, so let's talk about this shift in academic labor. What are some of the biggest changes you're seeing? What does the Academic's Handbook highlight there?
Well, what struck me is this idea of casualization and precarity, which is basically a fancy way of saying that there's a growing trend of universities hiring academics on these short-term contracts. So they don't have the job security and benefits that come with the tenure track, which makes it a more unpredictable career path.
Yeah, it sounds like a real nail-biter.
Right. And what's interesting is we saw this huge jump in applications to graduate school, but then a lot of universities had hiring freezes. So now you have this very competitive job market with tons of highly qualified people all fighting for fewer and fewer permanent positions.
It's a bottleneck. Right.
Totally. Like a massive bottleneck, especially for those coveted tenure track roles.
And the Academic's Handbook, doesn't shy away from this, does it? Like,
Yeah.
it addresses what happens to those who don't end up on the tenure track.
No, it doesn't. It talks about all those different paths people take, which can include leaving academia altogether, or they might find really meaningful roles within the university, but not as like traditional faculty.
Which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like, the skills you build in academia, those are valuable in so many different settings.
Absolutely.
And this brings up a really important point that the Academics Handbook makes about the responsibility of those who are in tenured positions.
It's like, look, if you've got that security of tenure, you need to step up and be aware of the struggles your colleagues are going through, those who are in less secure positions. And you need to be aware of what your students are going through, too. It's about supporting them and advocating for a fairer system.
Yeah, and recognizing that everybody's not starting from the same place.
Right.
Okay, and it's not just job security, right? Like, the Academics Handbook also mentions changes in the kind of resources that academics have access to.
Oh, yeah. Like, remember the days when you could, like, easily get funding to travel for your research, or you had a decent budget for your projects? Well, for many academics, those days seem to be fading fast. And the book also points out that some departments and even whole programs are facing instability. So it's just another layer of uncertainty when you're trying to build a career in this field.
Okay, so navigating this, like, super competitive and uncertain world definitely includes the academic job search, which is a whole beast in itself. And the Academics Handbook has some really key insights here. The first one, which might seem obvious, but it's super important, deadlines.
Yeah, and what really surprised me is how strict things have become around deadlines. Because of all the HR rules and affirmative action policies, if your application isn't 100% complete by the deadline, guess what? They just chuck it out. It's disqualified automatically.
No second chances.
Apparently not. And it's different from how it used to be, too. The book points out that before, universities would often contact candidates if something was missing, give them a chance to fix it. But that's pretty much gone now. It's completely on you to make sure every single thing is in by the deadline.
That's intense.
It is. So that means having those letters of recommendation ready to go and maybe even using a dossier service as a backup. You really can't be too prepared.
And then, if you make it past that initial deadline hurdle, what's next? The book talks about preliminary interviews.
Oh, yeah, those are super common now. And these preliminary interviews, they often lead to what they call a short list of candidates who get invited for an on-campus visit. Like, usually it's only about 3 people, maybe with 2 alternates, just to give you an idea. But of course, this can vary depending on, the department's budget and who they're looking for.
And that campus visit, that's not just a casual chat, is it?
No way. It's more like a week-long performance where you're constantly being evaluated. Like, the book goes into detail about all the different things they're looking at. Can you interact well with the other faculty? Are you a good fit for the department's culture? Can you hold your own in a conversation with all sorts of people? And then, of course, there's the big one, the job talk.
Right, where you present your research.
Exactly. But it's not just about the job talk. They're also watching how you handle yourself in more informal settings. Like, are you a good conversationalist? Do you seem like you'd be a good teacher? It's a lot of pressure.
Like a marathon audition.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you make it through all that. You've got the job. Now, the book talks about this other important aspect, which is developing your academic identity and, like, feeling like you actually belong, which I imagine can be really hard for some people.
Oh, totally. And this section really resonated with me. They talk about this scholar, Yuridia Ramirez, and her experience. She felt like she didn't quite fit in, and people would question her intelligence just because she was a very, vibrant, outgoing person.
Why?
And it was even worse when people would imply that she was only admitted to the program or hired because of diversity initiatives, not because of her own merit. Ouch.
Ouch is right. That's so dismissive and demeaning. So what did she do? How did she cope with that?
Well, what's really inspiring is that she took charge. She proactively sought out faculty of color, especially women, both in her department and across the university. She wanted mentors who could really understand what she was going through.
Yeah, you need people in your corner who get it.
Absolutely. And she also found a lot of support and community in student of color groups. It's a reminder that those spaces where you feel seen and understood, those are so important.
For sure. And did the institution itself, did they do anything to make her feel more welcome?
They did. There's this story about how a dean at the graduate school was in a meeting with some students, and someone said something about them being diversity recruits. And the dean just shut it down right then and there. She said, "None of you are diversity recruits. You're here because you earned your place."
Good for her.
Right. And then the dean actually went on to mentor Ramirez, included her in different programs and committees. It really sent that message like, you, as you are, you belong here.
It's so powerful.
And it ties into what the book calls radical authenticity, which is this idea of being your true self when you're presenting yourself professional. Like, don't try to fit into some mold of what you think an academic should be.
Right. Be yourself, quirks and all.
Yeah. And Ramirez talks about how she was very upfront about her values in her application materials, like her commitment to community work and public history. She wanted search committees to know who she was from the get-go, so she could end up in a place that truly valued her, her whole self.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Okay, so let's fast forward a bit. You've gone through the job search, you landed a position, now comes the salary negotiation. Does the Academics Handbook offer any tips there?
Oh, yeah, it does. It's got some really good practical advice. And the first thing it says is that negotiating your salary is totally normal, and it's often expected. So don't be afraid to ask for what you're worth.
Okay, but what about the fear of, like, asking for too much and then them withdrawing the offer?
Well, the book says that it's very rare for a university to pull an offer just because you tried to negotiate. But it does suggest that you do your research and be strategic about it.
What kind of research should you do?
Well, first, try to understand the university's salary system. Like, is it merit-based, or do they have union contracts that dictate salary increases? And then, crucially, you need to find out what your peers are making, people at your same rank with similar experience. That way, you can make a good argument for what you should be paid.
So it's about knowing your worth within the context of that specific institution.
Exactly. And when it comes to actually asking for more, the book says, go for it. Ask her what you want, even if it's the higher end of their offered range, but be prepared to justify it based on your qualifications and your experience.
Right. Have your ducks in a row.
Exactly. And they also caution against asking for something wildly out of line with what your colleagues are making. Like, that might rub people the wrong way, or it might just not be possible because of budget constraints. It's about finding that sweet spot.
Okay, so negotiating your salary, it's an art form. Now, the Academics Handbook also acknowledges that the traditional tenure track, that's not the right path for everyone. So it explores alternative career paths, both inside and outside academia.
Right. And one story that stood out to me was about Lori Flores. She was offered a tenure track position, but she turned it down.
Whoa, that's a big decision. Why did she do that?
Well, she felt like the traditional academic route, it often involves delaying gratification for years and years. And she questioned whether the tenure track was really the best way or even the only way to have a meaningful career, especially for someone with a humanities PhD. She had already achieved some professional success before going into academia, so she knew she could make a difference in other ways, like through writing and public advocacy.
It's a reminder that there are so many ways to use your skills and knowledge, even if it's not within the traditional university setting.
Totally.
Okay, so let's say you've got the job, you've negotiated your salary, you're ready to start. Now, you have to navigate the sometimes tricky world of departmental culture and those unspoken rules, the office politics. What does the book say about that?
It really stresses that departments often have these long histories with established relationships and even some leftover bad feelings from past conflicts. So it's important to pay attention and observe how things work, like who always speaks up in meetings, how do people interact with each other.
It's like you're stepping into a play that's been running for years, and you don't know all the backstory.
Exactly. And the advice is to find a balance between speaking up on issues that are important to you, but also knowing that you don't have to fight every single battle.
Right, pick your battles.
Yeah, especially if you're a new assistant professor working towards tenure, it's about being strategic and choosing when to assert yourself.
Okay, speaking of tenure, that's a big one. And the Academics Handbook is very clear. If you're on the tenure track, understanding the requirements and how service plays into it, that's crucial.
Oh, yeah. As early as possible, find out exactly what they expect to see in your tenure file. This way you can plan accordingly and make sure you're focusing on the right things.
So figure out the game plan early on.
Exactly. And then when those requests for service work come in, you need to be able to evaluate them. Is this a good use of my time right now?
Especially if you're at a research-focused university, right?
Yeah, totally. If research is the main thing they're looking at for tenure, then maybe you need to say no to some of those service requests so you can focus on writing and publishing.
So learning to say no strategically, that's a key skill.
It is, because the book makes it very clear that saying yes to everything, that's not the path to tenure. And those service commitments, they can eat up so much time.
And sometimes they come with unexpected drama, right?
Oh yeah, you never know what you're getting into sometimes. Okay, now, for those who are not on the tenure track, what does success look like in that context? Does the book have any examples?
It does. It talks about this professor, Sarah Portnoy. She's an associate professor, but she's not on the tenure track. She focuses mainly on teaching, and she actually really likes it that way.
Why?
Well, it gives her a lot of flexibility, which was especially important when she was raising her kids. And she was still able to do really cool stuff like develop new courses in food studies, lead a study abroad program, and even publish a book based on her teaching and research.
That's awesome. So you can really have a fulfilling career even if you're not on that traditional tenure track.
Oh, absolutely. Though the book does mention that her initial salary offer was quite low, considering the high cost of living in Los Angeles, she and her husband were able to make it work because he also had an income.
Right. Two incomes make a difference.
For sure. But it does highlight that while non-tenure track positions can be great in terms of flexibility, the salary, and benefits, those are definitely things to consider. Okay, so whether you're on the tenure track or not, the Academic's Handbook really stresses the importance of being effective in meetings and managing your time. What are some of the key takeaways there?
Well, they really emphasize planning ahead and being really clear about your priorities.
Yeah.
You have to avoid overcommitting yourself, which is so easy to do in this field.
Right. Everyone wants a piece of you.
Exactly. And they offer this great tip when someone asks you to do something, just say, "I'll get back to you on that."
That's a good one.
Right. It buys you some time to think it through and check your schedule before you say yes to something new.
That's a lifesaver.
Totally. And they also talk about the idea of like passing on requests to other colleagues if it's a good fit for them. Sometimes that can actually be a form of mentorship, giving someone a chance to develop their skills.
Yeah, it's about spreading the opportunities around. Okay, so the Academic's Handbook then talks about what they call the Trinity of academic life: research, teaching, and service. And it sounds like finding the right balance between these three things, that's a constant struggle.
It is. And what's interesting is the book points out that the relative importance of those three areas, it really depends on the type of institution you're at. Like at a big research university, research is king.
Right, publish or perish. Right.
Exactly. But at a smaller liberal arts college, teaching might be the main focus. And then you've got some universities where they expect you to excel at both research and teaching, which can be super demanding.
Wow. So it's not just about your individual strengths, it's about the culture of the institution too.
Yeah, for sure. And the book also points out that there can be some real inequalities in how service responsibilities are distributed.
Like who ends up doing the most service work?
Often it falls on younger scholars, women faculty, and faculty of color. And all that service work it can take away from their research time, which might not be the best thing for their careers in the long run.
Right, because in some institutions, research output, that's what gets you promoted.
Exactly.
Okay, so to support their research, many academics rely on grants and fellowships. And the book offers some advice on crafting successful proposals.
Oh, yeah. It goes beyond just writing a good intro paragraph. Like, you have to make a really compelling case for your project, and you have to be super clear about all the key elements.
Like, what are the must-haves in a good proposal?
Well, you need a clear statement of your main argument. You have to explain how your research will add something new to the field, outline the big themes and questions you're exploring, and what your theoretical framework is. You have to talk about your methodology, your sources, and how your research will actually be carried out and what the final product will look like.
Yeah.
Plus, you need a realistic timeline.
So it's not just what you're going to do, but why it matters. Right.
Exactly. And why you're the best person to do it. You can't assume that the reviewers will just get it. You have to spell it out for them.
Make them see the brilliance of your idea. Okay, now, all this research and teaching wouldn't be possible without those amazing research libraries. And the Academic's Handbook talks about how their role is evolving in this digital age.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like they're trying to balance all these things at once. They still have to maintain those physical collections, but there's this huge demand for online resources, which are often super expensive. And library budgets, they're often being squeezed.
So they're doing a lot with less.
Yeah, they really are. And the book points out that faculty members, they can actually play a really important role here. Like they can advocate for increased funding for the library because it's such a vital resource for everyone.
Makes sense. A good library benefits everybody. And speaking of advocating for change, the book also discusses this movement to rethink how academic work is being evaluated, right? Like moving away from just counting publications.
Yes. They talk about the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, which is often called DORA. And basically what DORA says is that we should stop using those journal-based metrics like impact factors as the main way to judge the quality of someone's research.
Because impact factors, they don't tell the whole story, right?
Exactly. And Dora says we should look at a wider range of things, like the actual impact of the research, not just how many times it's been cited.
It's about quality, not just quantity.
Exactly. And libraries are also really involved in this push for open access, making research freely available to everyone.
Right. Because knowledge should be shared, not locked behind paywalls.
Totally. And many libraries are supporting faculty who are pushing back against those big commercial publishers who charge a fortune for access to their journals.
Yeah, it's a whole system that needs to change.
It is. And we're even seeing some funding agencies now that's starting to mandate that the research they fund has to be open access. So things are shifting slowly but surely.
It's a good sign. Okay, let's talk about ethics. Because the Academic's Handbook also digs into the crucial role of institutional review boards, or IRBs, in making sure research is ethical. What's their main job?
So IRBs, they're all about protecting the rights and well-being of research participants. And the first thing the book says is to get really familiar with your university's specific IRB rules. Like they can vary a lot.
So know the rules of the game.
Exactly. And they also recommend checking out the Belmont Report, which lays out the basic ethical principles for research involving human subjects.
Okay, so if you're doing research with people, Belmont Report, that's your Bible.
Pretty much. And they also talk about some of the trickier ethical dilemmas, like how do you compensate participants fairly, especially in sensitive settings like prisons? It's not always straightforward.
Right. You have to think through all those potential consequences.
Yeah, and the book has this cautionary tale about a lawsuit brought by the Havasupai tribe. Researchers had collected their DNA samples, but then they used them for studies that the tribe hadn't consented to.
Oh, wow. That's a big no-no.
It is. And even though the lawsuit was eventually dismissed for technical reasons, it really highlights the importance of getting informed consent from participants and being transparent about how their data will be used.
Right. You can't just assume that people are okay with you using their information for any purpose you want.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that those review processes, they're there for a reason. We have to be vigilant about protecting people.
Okay, so let's move on to publishing. You've done the research, you've gotten IRB approval, now it's time to get your work out there. What does the Academic's Handbook say about navigating the publishing world?
Well, the first thing they say is don't stress about the first draft. Like preparing a manuscript, that's a process. It takes time.
Yeah, you can't expect to get it perfect right out of the gate.
Exactly. And they break down the typical structure of a manuscript, like the introduction, the literature review, the methods section, the results, the discussion. They explain what each section should do.
So it's like a roadmap for writing a good paper.
Yeah, it is. And then choosing the right journal for your work, that's super important too.
Right, because there are so many journals out there.
Oh yeah, tons. And while it's tempting to just go for the most prestigious ones, the book says that the most important thing is to think about your audience. Like, who do you want to read your work? Choose a journal that they're actually going to see.
That makes sense. Target your audience.
Exactly. And they also give you a realistic timeline for the peer review process, which, let's be honest, can be excruciatingly slow.
Like, how long are we talking?
It can take anywhere from a few months to like a year or even more. So patience is key.
Definitely not for the faint of heart.
And with all this talk about open science and transparency, the book also touches on data sharing, right?
Yes. They encourage researchers to organize their data and any code they used in a way that could be shared with others. But they're also very careful to say that you have to be mindful of participant consent and privacy. Like you can't just share people's personal information without their permission.
Right, you have to be responsible. Absolutely. And a lot of universities are developing specific policies around data sharing now.
Okay, so beyond journal articles, the Academic's Handbook also reminds us that books, those are still super important in academia.
Oh yeah, they're not going away anytime soon. Like books are still the best way to present a really complex argument with all the nuance and depth it deserves.
Right. You can't always do that in a short journal article.
Exactly. And the book talks about the different types of publishers, like trade presses, commercial academic publishers, and university presses. And they also acknowledge that the whole publishing world has changed a lot over time.
Yeah, it's a different landscape now.
Yeah.
So for someone who's turning their dissertation into a book, What advice does the book have for them?
Well, they're very clear that it's not just about slapping a new cover on your dissertation. You often have to restructure the argument, maybe reorganize the whole thing, and sometimes parts of the dissertation are better suited for journal articles instead.
So it's about rethinking the project with a wider audience in mind.
Exactly. And they point out that university presses, they get way more proposals than they can actually publish. So your book has to really stand out.
There's got to be a winner.
It does. And then there's the peer review process, which is always a nail biter.
Yeah, I imagine getting feedback on your book, that can be pretty intense.
It is. But the book says to look at it as a chance to make your work even better. Like if the reviewers have different opinions, try to figure out what the underlying issues are. What are they really trying to tell you?
So use the feedback strategically.
Exactly. And then once the book is accepted, there's still the whole production process, like copy editing, design, proofreading, indexing. It's a lot of
It's a
steps.
team effort.
It is. And the book stresses the importance of the author being involved in promoting the book once it's out there. Because at the end of the day, you want people to read your work.
Really, you want to make a difference. Okay, let's shift gears now and talk about teaching. The Academic's Handbook dives into the specific challenges and rewards of teaching in small classes.
Yeah. And they really emphasize that the classroom is never a neutral space. Like, there are always power dynamics at play, and it's important to acknowledge those and make them visible to students.
So be aware of your own position of power as the instructor.
Exactly. And they also encourage creating opportunities for students to teach each other, really make it a collaborative learning experience.
Yeah, everyone has something to contribute.
Right. And they talk about this idea of preaching the process, which means like being open about your own learning struggles, not pretending that you have all the answers. And when you're giving feedback, focus on the process, not just the final product.
So help students develop those critical thinking skills.
Yeah. And the book also encourages instructors to be aware of all the different factors that can impact how students learn and to know what kind of support services are available on campus.
Right, because students are dealing with so much stuff outside of the classroom.
They are. And finally, they talk about promoting metacognition, which is basically thinking about your own thinking. Like, encourage students to reflect on how they learn best, what works for them, what doesn't.
So help them become more self-aware learners.
Exactly.
Okay, large lecture classes, those are a whole different animal. Does the Academic's Handbook have any advice for surviving those?
Oh, yeah, it does. And they're very clear that teaching a large lecture class, it can be really daunting, but it can also be incredibly rewarding.
It's a challenge for sure.
It is. And they suggest getting creative with your assignments, using technology to keep students engaged, like clickers or online polls.
Keep them on their toes.
Exactly. And they also recommend meeting with your TAs regularly and using flexible grading rubrics. Like, you want to make sure everyone's on the same page.
So consistency and collaboration are key.
They are.
The book also touches on how to teach those, what they call difficult topics. Like, how do you deal with sensitive or controversial issues in the classroom?
They talk about Marcia Chatelain and her experience with the hashtag Ferguson syllabus.
Oh, yeah, that was a really interesting initiative.
It was. And it showed how social media can be a great way for educators to connect with each other, share resources, and support each other when they're trying to teach about these challenging topics.
It's about building community, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, the Academic's Handbook also highlights some cool examples of innovative assignments that faculty have come up with.
Oh, yeah, there are some really creative ideas in there. Like, there's this collaborative digital humanities project at NC State where students from different disciplines all work together.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And then there's this professor at Barnard College, Brenda Elsey, who has her students create Wikipedia entries to address the lack of women's and gender history on the site.
That's a great idea.
It is. And then there's Romeo Guzman, who teaches California studies, and he has his students write migrant letters instead of traditional essays. So it's a way to engage with history in a more personal and creative way.
It's about thinking outside the box. Okay, technology in the classroom, that's another big one. What does the Academic's Handbook say about that?
Well, there are a lot of different perspectives on it. Like Magdalena Majiska, she has a no devices policy in her small classes.
Really? No laptops, no phones?
Nope. She wants students to be fully present and engaged with each other, but then you've got other instructors like Laura Harrison who use all kinds of technology in their classes, like clickers, online platforms, you name it.
So it's about finding what works best for you and your students.